Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to make a guide on how to line up your cooldowns as a Shadow Priest. This is a question that I've been getting a lot, especially recently, where people are asking me, "Hey, is it better to hold on to my Mindbender until Voidform is up every time and use it like that? Is it better to save Power Infusion for Voidform or what?" Right? People are always asking me what's the best way to use your cooldowns. And the answer is a little bit nuanced, so I wanted to make this video. Hopefully I can make it pretty brief and get the point across. But like I said, it's kind of nuanced, so it might take a little bit of explaining. So what I've got right here is basically like a sample of what you might start out with, right? So you're about to do, let's say you're about to do the Terra group or something, right? Your raid is getting ready to do a certain boss fight, and let's say the boss lives for exactly 5 minutes. Okay, so you've looked at other people's logs, and you're like, okay, it looks like most guilds kill this boss in about 5 minutes. That's what you should be doing when you're trying to plan on how you're going to line up your cooldowns and things on specific bosses. So we know that this boss is going to die at 5 minutes. So the first thing I did was I just took our 3 major cooldowns. I'm using these with their default cooldown timings, right? Assuming that it'll translate between the covenants. So if you're a Necrolord Shadow Priest or a Night Fae Shadow Priest or a Venthyr Shadow Priest or even a Kyrian Shadow Priest, these should line up pretty similarly, although with Kyrians you've got another ability to add in here, which would be Boon, right? So you'd have to add that in here. So I've got these 3 major ones. This is also assuming you're playing Shadowflame Prism, so you're running Mindbender instead of Shadow Fiend, right? So it's on a 1 minute cooldown instead of I think Shadow Fiend's 3 minutes or something. It's been so long since I've played it. So the first thing I did was I just went in here and I took Mindbender and I plopped it down every 1 minute at 1 minute intervals, right? So we assume we do it on pull, and then at 1 minute, 2 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and then we would do it at 5 minutes, but the boss is dead, so there's no point in doing anything there because the fight's gonna be over, right? And then I did the same thing with Voidform. So Voidform we used on pull, so at 0 approximately, right? And then it's a 1.5 minute cooldown, so we use it at 1:30, we use it at 3, and we use it at 4:30. All right. So this is just assuming you press it as soon as it's available every single time. Okay. This is like how you want to start out when you're deciding where to put your cooldowns. And then I did the same thing with Power Infusion. It's a 2 minute cooldown, so it's at 0, it's at 2 minutes, and it's at 4 minutes. And I wrote how many different uses you get of each cooldown on the left here, and the times that they happen right at the top. So you can see by this that there are some natural things that line up, right? So the first thing is Mindbender being on a 1 minute cooldown and Power Infusion being on a 2 minute cooldown. That just means that every other Mindbender, it's going to line up with your Power Infusion. So at 2 minutes, your third Mindbender cast will line up with your second Power Infusion cast, right? And then the same thing happens at 4 minutes, right? Your 5th Mindbender cast will line up with your 3rd Power Infusion cast, right? And this means that with Shadow Priest specifically, our cooldowns are more effective if you use them with other cooldowns, right? So this Mindbender at 1 minute is going to do less damage than this Mindbender at 2 minutes, just because this one has a power infusion attached to it, right? The Power Infusion will increase the attack speed of the Mindbender. It'll make it so that you can cast more Mind Blasts and Shadow Word Deaths because you have more haste, etc., right? So whenever you can line up cooldowns like this, they're more effective. So it's better. They're stronger, right? They're stronger than the sum of their parts, right? So then the other thing you'll notice is there's a similar scenario with Mindbender and Voidform, right? So Void Eruption is on a 1.5 minute cooldown, so you use them both on pull, and then they line up again at 3 minutes, right? And if this were to extend out even further, your Mindbender and your Voidform would line up again at 6 minutes, right? So just due to the nature of their different cooldown timings, some of them line up naturally on their own, right? Which is a pretty nice little side effect. So if you're very first going into a boss, I would say do this kind of thing, and then the next thing you want to do to figure out, because if you just use your cooldowns every single time they come off cooldown, you'll do decent damage, right? You won't do the best damage, and it's not the best way to play for sure, but it is not a bad way to play, right? You're always better casting more abilities, not always, but usually better casting more abilities than you would be if you cast less abilities, right? Which seems pretty straightforward. So then the way that we can optimize this to do a little bit more damage is you want to hold onto certain cooldowns to line them up with other cooldowns until you get to the point where you don't lose a use, right? So for instance, in this example in particular, you've got 5 Mindbender casts over the course of the fight, right? At every minute interval, right? But if you were to, let's say, move this Mindbender, hold on, if you were to move this Mindbender at 4 minutes over to 4:30, like this, right? Then you still get 5 uses, right? You can still count 5. You've got one at 0, 1, 2, 3, and then at 4:30, right? Because it lines up with your Voidform. So you still have the same amount of uses, but it lines up with Voidform, which is pretty nice. And the reason why this is better than lining it up with Power Infusion at 4 minutes is because you're also going to take this final Power Infusion cast and move that to your last Voidform as well, right? So now you'll notice the uses aren't any different, right? You still have 5 Mindbenders, you still have 4 Voidforms, and you still have 3 Power Infusions. It's just that your last use is going to be just nearly as strong as your first use, right? So if you've ever looked at your damage graph as a Shadow Priest on a raid boss, you'll see there's a really big spike at the beginning, and then there's a couple normal size bumps, and then if you're doing it like this, you'll get another really big spike at the end, right? Because you're lining up all 3 cooldowns like this. So this setup right here, where you moved your last Mindbender to 4:30 and your Power Infusion to 4:30 instead of being at 4 minutes, this will do more damage for you than if you were to do the original one of just press everything on cooldown, right? So basically the rule of thumb for lining up your cooldowns like this is you want to use them as many times as possible, and then you want to align your last use of all of them as best you can, right? So there will be times where this Mindbender isn't up for another 6 seconds or something, and so you'll cast it at 4:36 instead of 4:30. That's okay, right? But you want to try and line them up as close as you can, like this, right? So now I'll go through a couple different logs, and I'll show you what this looks like in the real world, right? So first off, this is a Guardian of the First One's kill that we had, where I did 9.1, almost 9.2 thousand DPS, okay? So this is normal Guardian of the First Ones. We just cleared this tonight, and I'm eye level 238. It was the top item level parse, and it was a 99th percentile parse, and actually it was like the rank 3 parse in the world for normal Guardians, right, for Shadow Priests. So this is what it looks like. I've got my Mindbender casts up here, I've got my Power Infusion casts in the middle, and I've got my Void Eruption casts on the bottom. Now this is going to be a little bit different because this fight was only 3 minutes instead of 5 minutes like my example, but the fundamentals are the same, right? So you want to use everything on at the beginning, right? Like I do here. I use my Mindbender early, and then my Voidform, and then immediately Power Infusion, right? And then my Mindbender is back up somewhere around here at the 1 minute mark, but I hold on to it and I don't use it until until it lines up with Voidform, right? So I know that I'm only going to get 3 uses of Mindbender in a 3-minute fight, right? So I'm going to hold on to it for a little bit for my second use to line up with my second use of Voidform, right? So I line those 2 up, which means that my Mindbender does more damage, right? Because in Voidform, you get the extra Mind Blast casts. You're doing more damage because you're in Voidform, stuff like that, right? So this Mindbender is stronger than if it were by itself. And then my Power Infusion also comes back off cooldown somewhere around here, around 2 minutes. But I decide to hold that for when Mindbender and Voidform come back off cooldown, which is going to happen right around 2:35 or 2:30 or so, right? So then I use my Mindbender about 7 seconds before I used Voidform, which is kind of what I was saying before, where it won't line up perfectly to the second, right? But you can line them up pretty nicely like this. And then, yeah, you can see it turned out to be a lot of damage, right? So if we look at the graph for this, this is like I was saying. So you've got this really big peak at the beginning where I'm spiking up way high during all my cooldowns. And then we go into like a lull where I'm not hitting any cooldowns, so I'm only doing, my maintaining damage. And then we get into this second hill right here. This is where I popped Mindbender and Voidform at the same time. So I peak over 10k DPS for a little bit here. So that's pretty good. And then we get another little lull where I'm not doing too much, except this is when the boss starts to hit execute phase. So this valley is a little bit higher than this valley, just because I'm running Twist of Fate, so I'm just doing more damage. And then this last peak right here, which is pretty close to as high as my original peak during Lust, right? These are pretty close to the same height, right? This last peak is me lining up Mindbender and Voidform and Power Infusion at the end, right? So this is what it looks like when you do everything really well, right? Not to pat myself on the back, but this is how you want your graphs to look, right? And now here's an example of a time when I didn't use everything so well. So this is our Terragru kill, and the Terragru can kind of throw things off a little bit damage meter wise, because like you can get strong powers or you can get really weak powers, and that can throw a lot into the mix. But that doesn't change how you use your cooldowns and things. So again, I've got Mindbender on top, I've got Power Infusion in the middle, and I've got Void Eruption on the bottom. And on this pull, this is also normal Terragru, right? So we did this tonight as well. On this pull, I decided to use Mindbender pretty much on cooldown, so I use it right at the beginning at around 2 seconds, and then I use it again at around 1 minute and 2 seconds. I use it again at around 2 minutes and 7 seconds, right? The key thing, this is almost the same length of fight, right? The Guardian fight was 2 minutes and 56 seconds, and the Terragru was 2:44. So they're pretty close to the same fight length, but you'll notice on the Guardian, I have my Mindbender and my Voidform lined up real nice, but on the Terragru, I definitely don't, right? So my second Mindbender cast at 1 minute and 2 seconds is going to be gone by the time I cast this Voidform at 1 minute 23, right? And then I did manage to line up my Mindbender and my Power Infusion at the end, but that's mostly just because of the natural synchronicity I was talking about earlier, where just because Power Infusion is twice as long of a cooldown as Mindbender, every other time you cast Mindbender, it will just happen to line up with Power Infusion, right? So if we take a look, I'm down here at number 6 or number 7 on the damage meter, right? I was beat by our other Shadow Priest, right? So obviously I could have done more damage, and then if we click on my damage, you'll notice there aren't any real defined peaks here, right? And now granted, this damage meter is going to look a little bit different, this graph I mean, because the Terragru has different mechanics than the Guardian of the first ones, right? But the idea is the same. You want, on a fight like this, you would want to see a really big peak at the beginning, like I've got right here, and then you'd want to see another peak right here in the middle around your second Voidform. But mine is just kind of this big long blob, right? And then you want to see a really big peak at the end as well, and I definitely don't have that, right? It just kind of falls off into nothing, right? So this is an example of doing your cooldowns badly, right? Now, granted, this fight that we just did, the Terragru normal, we are way outgearing this, so it's not like me misaligning my cooldowns is going to make us not kill the boss or anything. Same with this Guardian's kill. This killing the Guardian of the first one's on normal is something we could do in our sleep, basically. So I want to take a look for my final log to wrap this video up. This is the 9 mythic kill, and now these logs are private, so I want to be careful about what I show. But this is our kill of the 9 on mythic, right? The one that I posted the video of, and this is a good example of how you want to line up your cooldowns over a long fight, right? So those last 2 fights were under 3 minutes, but this fight is 8.5 minutes, right? So because it gets a little more complicated the longer the fight goes on, right? Because you don't want to, I mean, there's just more time, so you have to think about when you're going to use stuff more often, right? So I use everything on pull right here. I line up, again, I've got Mindbender on top, Power Infusion in the middle, Void Eruption on the bottom. I line up everything at the beginning, because that's just the opener that everybody does. So, I mean, it's always going to look like that. And then I use my first Mindbender as soon as it comes off cooldown. But you'll notice down here, my Void Eruption should have come off cooldown at around a minute, maybe a minute 20, a minute 15, depending on how much Fey Guardians I got, how much cooldown reduction I got from Fey Guardians. But I didn't use it then, right? The reason for this is because on the 9 specifically, I wanted to, we're going to lust as soon as the 3rd boss comes down, Skyja or whatever. So I'm going to hold that Voidform for this lust, right? There's a chance that I could have used that Voidform and it would be up in time for the lust. It's about a minute and 15 seconds between those two. But I played it, I wanted to play it safe, make sure I had everything up for lust. So I just held on to that Voidform. And then I also held on to my second Power Infusion. It would come up right around here at 2 minutes, but instead I push it back to right when we lust at around 2:30, right? So then I line everything up for lust so that we can get as much damage as possible at that moment, because that's typically why you're lusting there, right? Is to get as much damage as possible. So you want to line up your cooldowns with your lust when you can. And then after that, I use my Mindbender on cooldown, and then we get my next Voidform, which is it comes up and I use it right immediately. So this Mindbender was at 3:33 and this Void Eruption was at 3:53, so there's like 20 seconds between those two. So I didn't line these up with each other. That's because if I had lined these up, it pushes all of these other uses back, and I may have lost a use of Mindbender if I had done that, right? So I don't line these two up, and then Mindbender and Power Infusion just so happen to line up naturally again. So I get that nice use out of them at 4:30, and then my Voidform comes back up at around 5 minutes, 5:08, so I use it there. Mindbender comes up again at around 5:30, so I just use it on cooldown. And then we get into this moment where Void Eruption, Mindbender, and Power Infusion all come off cooldown within about 19, almost 20 seconds of each other. And I try to line them up right here as nicely as I can. But the way I ended up doing this, I probably should have held this Void Eruption maybe like another 10 seconds or so, and then lined it up a little bit better with this Mindbender and this Power Infusion, right? To try and get as much as I could out of those two. Especially because if I had pushed this back 10 seconds, then my last use of Void Eruption would have also been at around 7:45, right? Which is still plenty of time to get another use by the end of the fight, right? So I tried to line up my last Power Infusion with my last Mindbender and my last Void Eruption right here. And then the fight ends up taking a little bit longer, so I get another use of Mindbender and Void Eruption. And because I use my Void Eruption a little bit early here, it means that I do line up this Mindbender with this Void Eruption at the end of the fight, right? Which, if we go look at my damage graph, you'll see that it kind of lines up with all of these, right? So we have this hill at the beginning, right, at about 20k DPS or whatever. And then we've got another tiny hill right here with this first Mindbender. And then we've got a really big valley in between here where I'm not casting any of these cooldowns up to like almost 2:30. And then at 2:30, we have this huge spike, right? This is why I held those 3 cooldowns for Lust, right? Because we're trying to get as much damage as possible in this window, and I peaked at just about 30k DPS, right? So this is what I was trying to create, and it looks like it worked out, right? So then we have another little hill with this Mindbender cast right before 4 minutes, and then we have, it kind of stays level like this because during this little section between like 3:30 and 5 minutes almost, I'm using a couple different cooldowns, right, within a certain amount of time of each other, so it doesn't really have time for my DPS to fall off. It just kind of stays about constant, and then it jumps back up with this Mindbender PI combo, and then Voidform keeps it around, close to the 5k, maybe 6k mark. And then I get another Mindbender near the beginning of 6 minutes, right? The end of the 5 minutes. And then it drops off, and I've got nothing for a while. And then right about 6:30, which is this lineup right here, Mindbender, Power Infusion, Void Eruption, we get another big spike at about 10k DPS. And then after that, it drops off hard, and I go down to almost no DPS. And then at the very end, I line up my Void Eruption and my Mindbender again, and we get another peak, right? So I don't want to say that I played this fight perfectly, but this is the kind of graph that I was kind of aiming for, right? I did manage 6.6k DPS. This is when I was only 233 equipped item level, right? So I imagine my damage would go up since then because I'm now 238, almost 239, right? But as you can see by this graph, by this table, I was the second highest on the meters, so pretty good. And yeah, that's basically all I wanted to say. So to summarize again, we'll go back to this. You want to get as many uses of your cooldowns as you can within a fight, and then you want to try and line up for key moments. It's not as straightforward as this, where you just line up your last use every time, because there are times where maybe the boss jumps away for an intermission, or maybe you have to fight a bunch of ads or something, right? And you want to line up cooldowns for those moments if you can as well, right? But that's basically the how to line up your Shadow Priest cooldowns 101, right? It's a little complicated, it's a little nuanced. I'll gladly walk you through more stuff like this. Feel free to join my Discord if you want to, ask me about specific fights in particular, things like that, right? If there's any interest, maybe I can do a video like this where I show exactly where you should be using your cooldowns on specific fights in the raid. I can go through and walk you through this step by step as we look at a boss fight, and I could show you where would be best, right? Depending on like kill times and things. But yeah, that's going to be the end of the video, so hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you liked it, leave a like. If you really liked it, feel free to subscribe, maybe share it with your friends, or feel free to follow me on Twitch or join my Discord or whatever. I apologize for being a little long-winded, but I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.